Hey class, Mr. Long here again for our second video lecture. And this video lecture is actually going to be a review of what we've been talking about that has been going on in England with the documents of democracy. So we're going to take it way back and we're going to review some stuff that we've been talking about for the last, week and a half or so, starting out with the Magna Carta. So real quick recap of the Magna Carta. We should all know that it was a document, and it was a legal document that was forced upon King John of England in 1215. Now, King John of England was very, very unpopular. People did not like him. He was spending a lot of money. He was putting England in debt. And he was also spending money on a very, very expensive war against France. Now, when they were fighting France, they were losing and losing badly. Not only were they losing the war, but they were also losing a lot of land that England controlled in France. So in order to raise more money to continue to fight in this war against France, King John of England tried to raise taxes on his citizens. And of course, the people that he was trying to raise taxes on were the rich noble barons. And really, these people keep the king in power. And if it wasn't for the rich barons and nobles, he wouldn't have as much power as he did. But the problem is that these people did not want to pay for the taxes. And English nobles and King John conflicted. They didn't like each other. He wanted to do one thing, they wanted to do another. So in the year 1215, the nobles forced King John to sign this legal document that was called the Magna Carta. Now, never before has an English monarch had to ever sign a document. And this Magna Carta document that was signed in 1215 limited King John's powers. Now, before the Magna Carta, kings had absolute power. They were absolute monarchs, meaning they could rule as they please. They could do whatever they want. And the only person that a monarch ever had to answer to was God, and that was called divine right. Divine right is when God gives these kings or queens their power. So before, they never had to answer to anyone. Well, as he had to sign this document, he had to limit his power. So now it's no longer absolute monarchy, but it's more of a constitutional monarchy. When I say constitution, I want you guys to always think of a list of rules and laws. So what was the Magna Carta? That's the major question. I've already mentioned that individual rights and liberties for citizens were given. There was more rights and liberties that were given to the people. It was a contract between the king and the nobles of England. It limited his power, as I mentioned before. And monarchs now had to rule by law rather than the way they pleased. So two important clauses that we need to mention, Clause 12 and Clause 39. And Clause 12 had to do with the monarch trying to raise taxes. And he could no longer raise taxes without the permission of the people. So before, if the king wanted to raise taxes, he would just do it. He wouldn't have to ask anyone's permission or get anyone's approval. And now, according to Clause 12, he would have to get permission to raise taxes to get money if he needed it. Clause 39 is another very important part of the Magna Carta, and according to Clause 39, a person had the right to a jury trial and to the protection of the law. If a person committed a crime, they were not sent to jail or prison, and the key was thrown away forever, and they were in prison forever. It wasn't like that. Now, if someone committed a crime, they would be put in front of a jury, and the jury would find that person either guilty or innocent, and then they would be sentenced if they were guilty. So now even criminals are going to be given certain liberties or rights. A king was no longer able to punish subjects without reason. Before, if a king didn't like you or a monarch didn't like you, they could throw you in jail or have you executed for no reason, and there's nothing you can do about that. No more. King or a monarch could no longer do that, and he could no longer punish his subjects without a reason or a cause. So we're going to go ahead and fast forward about 400 years, still talking about England. It is now the year 1603 in England. Queen Elizabeth is the queen, the monarch, but Queen Elizabeth dies in the year 1603. And Queen Elizabeth, hopefully we remember, has no son or daughter. And Queen Elizabeth's throne goes to her closest relative, and her closest relative is James Stuart. Now, James Stuart is already King of Scotland, and once he inherits her throne, he is now King of England and King of Scotland, which will create some problems that we'll talk about in a little bit. So James Stuart is now called James the First. And James I, when he inherits the throne, has a major problem. England has no money. Queen Elizabeth has left England in a huge debt. And James struggles with England in order to get money out of Parliament. And Parliament does not want to give James I money. He needs to take care of the debt. But James I offends a lot of the Puritan members of Parliament. Now remember, guys, two things. Puritan is a form of Christianity. We talked about different forms of Christianity in these lessons. And then Parliament, remember what Parliament is. Parliament is like a group of people that help the king govern the country. So the king or queen has to work with Parliament and vice versa in order for the country to run smoothly. As a result of this, James I dies. And of course, when he dies, the throne is inherited by his son, Charles I. Now, Charles I is not liked at all by any of the English subjects. And James I starts off really bad with Parliament. And Charles I needs money, just like his father, James I. Charles needed lots of money because he was fighting a very expensive war with two countries, of course, one being France and the other one being Spain. And he needed money, but Parliament refused to give him any money, so he dissolved Parliament. Now remember, guys, when you dissolve something, you are getting rid of it, okay? And Parliament refuses, obviously, to give him money. So in the year 1628, Charles I was forced to call on Parliament because he needed money and he was desperate. But before Parliament issued Charles I any money, he was forced to sign the second very important document of democracy, which was the Petition of Rights. Now, the Petition of Rights had four major parts to it. Number one, the king could not imprison subjects without due cause. Number two, he could not levy taxes without Parliament's consent. Now, if you levy something, once again, you are raising taxes, so he can't do that without getting permission from Parliament. He could not house soldiers in private homes, and he could not impose martial law during peacetime. Now, the Petition of Rights was very important because it gave the idea that no one is above the law, including the king or queen. Everyone should follow the same rules and laws, regardless of who you are. So, of course, Charles I signs the Petition of Rights to get his money to continue to fight in the war against France and Spain. And once he gets his money, he dissolves Parliament right away. Does away with Parliament, doesn't even recognize Parliament. And in order to get more money, he starts to impose all kinds of fees and fines on the English people, which makes him a very unpopular person. And this is going to create the English Civil War. And remember, guys, Civil War is when you are fighting against your own country. And people were going against Charles I. And they wanted to remove Charles I because they felt that he was committing treason. Now, guys, when you commit treason, remember, that is when you betray your own country. Probably one of the worst things you can do in your country, especially if you are the leader. So Parliament has an individual by the name of Oliver Cromwell. He is the Puritan general, and he is on the hunt for Charles I. And he tracks down Charles I. He catches him. They find him. They put him in front of a jury, and of course he is found guilty of treason, and he is sentenced to death. He is the first reigning monarch in England to be tried, a public trial, and publicly executed in front of everyone. So at this point, England has no leader, and they need a leader. So of course, Oliver Cromwell comes along, since he is this hero who catches Charles I, and he becomes leader of England. But he does away with the monarchy, and he no longer recognizes England as a monarchy, and he turns England into a form of a republic. Now, hopefully we remember when under a republic, excuse the announcements, guys.
Welcome and introduction as well as PCSA. Atención, padres. Los invitamos a que pasen al auditorio para una presentación y una reunión de información del PCSA.
And back to the lecture, guys. Sorry about that. So anyways, Cromwell takes over. He turns England into a republic, and hopefully we remember that a republic is a form of democracy. And under a republic, you elect representatives to make decisions for you. But the republic was very, very short. It didn't last long at all. Cromwell soon turns England into a military dictatorship. Remember, he was an ex-general, so he is backed up by his military. And people did not like this at all. A dictatorship is almost worse than a monarchy. So England wanted their king or queen back. They wanted a monarchy again. And they were desperate. So Parliament finds Charles II. And Charles II is Charles I's son. Now, we all remember what happened to Charles I. He was publicly tried and executed. So now they bring back his son, his oldest son, to be king of England. And he does. And the time period that he comes back and returns a monarchy to England is called the Restoration. And this was a very, very important time period. And Charles II is king for a little while, but of course, as he gets older, he dies. And when Charles II dies, his son takes over. And his son's name is James II. And James II is absolutely hated. They do not like James II at all because James II is a Catholic. And Catholics are not liked at all. And James II does not get along with Parliament whatsoever. For one reason, James II starts to appoint his friends, or people that he knows that are also Catholics, to high-ranking government jobs. They become members of Parliament. And this does not make Parliament happy at all. So Parliament needs to figure out a way to get James II out as leader. And they came up with a solution. James II has an older daughter, and her name is Mary. And Mary is loved by Parliament because Mary and her husband William, who is the Prince of the Netherlands, are both Protestants. And they want to have a monarch that is a Protestant because James II, his wife, just gave birth to a son, which means that if he continues to be king when he dies, the throne will go to his son, and there will be a long line of Catholic kings, and Parliament does not want that. So they proposition William and Mary, And they basically tell William and Mary that if you come into England, you overthrow James II, who is your father, you will become king and queen. And William and Mary accepted this offer. And they came in, William led in with his army into London in 1688. And before he even got there, James II flees. He runs away. He goes to France. And this was known as the Glorious Revolution. There was no bloodshed. There was no fighting. No one died at all. So now William and Mary are not quite king and queen yet, because they have to sign a very, very important document. This is probably one of the most important democratic documents that we will talk about this year. It gives us influence when we write our U.S. Constitution. But Parliament forces William and Mary to sign the English Bill of Rights. And it changes England from an absolute monarchy, where a king and queen does anything they want and rules as they please, to a constitutional monarchy, which means it limits their power. They can only do so much, and they have to follow a set of rules and laws. So the English Bill of Rights was drafted in 1689, and it has 4 major parts. No suspending of Parliament's laws, so no longer dissolving Parliament at all. No levying or raising of taxes without specific grant from Parliament. No interfering from freedom of speech in Parliament. So if Parliament wants to speak up and they don't quite agree with the king or queen, they are allowed to have freedom of speech, and there will be no consequence to them at all. And there's no penalty for a citizen who petitions a king about grievances. Now, grievances, guys, are complaints. So a citizen also has freedom of speech. They also cannot get in trouble if they speak up against the king or queen. So never before has this happened. The English Bill of Rights, once again, 1689, very, very important. That's going to go ahead, guys, and conclude our review lecture. Please go back if you need to, and please make sure that you took